We're in a battle of ideas. Objective facts, self-evident truths, common sense are actually being dismissed for new truths that now somehow must be forced into law. And those who seek to do this are passionate. They're religious in their pursuit of these new truths that are unproven, they're mere assertions, and yet they're as passionate as any jihadist in making sure that the laws change and that common sense is dismissed as a thing of the past. Where did this come from?
You see, the influence that Hegel had is not just an influence in philosophy, it's an influence in theology, in history, in politics, in economics even, in law. Now, the fact that Hegel's ideas could be applied in those ways shows how fruitful his approach, and particularly the historical elements of his approach were, because it was that historical idea of things as having developed, as being a process, that could be applied by scholars in all these different areas.
Are you sometimes overwhelmed by the news and the moral dilemmas and changes in modern medicine that now confront us each day? Find out how you can make a difference in changing our culture in this edition of Life Matters. Brian Johnston is the Western Director of the National Right to Life Committee. And now here's our host, Brian Johnston.
Welcome to Life Matters. We're your program on the right to life, on the culture that has emanated from that premise that every human being is endowed by their creator, not endowed by the government, but endowed by their creator with the right to be alive. But there's a struggle now, a battle of ideas, and you're seeing some very strange ideas being pushed on our government, being established as proper and just laws, but they have no foundation in logic. They have no foundation in common sense. They're mere assertions of philosophy. We're going to talk about a philosophy that has completely filled our culture. Most people don't understand it. It's a lot like the air we breathe. You have oxygen in the air you breathe, and that's what your body needs. But you also have a lot of nitrogen. And you don't know that nitrogen is there until perhaps you've gone 100 feet below the surface of water, and the pressure then causes the nitrogen bubbles to contract. If you don't come up slowly, that nitrogen, even though you don't know it's there, it is there. And those bubbles will expand and kill you. And that's what we see in our culture. There's an idea that we've breathed in progressivism. We're going to examine the roots of progressivism. Where did this come from? The idea that progress is inherently good. I'm not talking about technical advances. We're talking about progressive thinking, moral thinking, and the nature of the law, the relationship of the government and the state to human beings, and what should be good law. There's some very bad laws being presented, bad laws that destroy lives and destroy culture, and yet they're presented as true. How could these people believe that? You might have people, maybe in your own church, or neighbors, or people you went to school with that are very well educated, and yet they somehow have taken on this idea that certain things need to be advanced. Even though they were not true in the past, they're proclaiming them true now. And some of these things actually go against nature itself and self-evident facts. They're passionate, and they're forcing it on the culture. How did this come to be? It's because of Fredreich Hegel. Again, you may not have heard his name. Be patient. We're going to explore what's really true. What are facts you can depend on? What are self-evident truths? And then what are the synthetic truths that have come out of this way of thinking that has infected our culture, this Hegelian worldview? We'll be right back, right after this.
To subscribe to the Life Matters podcast, go to lifematters.life, where you'll find out a lot more about life, culture, and the battle of ideas. And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Well, welcome back. And as we promised earlier, we're going to talk about a philosopher here. Don't let your eyes glaze over. Don't get worried. Philosophy is not a bad thing, and it's not as complicated as some people make it. The reason we're going to talk about it, though, is there is a philosopher that has influenced your culture much more than people think. That is Fredreich Hegel. And as we talk about it, again, many people don't even know his name, even though they're influenced by him. Let me tell you why I like philosophy. It's because one of my favorite books is the Book of Proverbs. Book of Proverbs was written for me. I take it personally because it says at the beginning it's written for the simple. So that's my book. But it's written for the simple to help make them wise and to come to understanding. And it's a great book. I recommend you spend time reading it. I like to read it as often as I can. There's 31 chapters. You could read one for every day of the month, and you can't get enough out of it. The depth of the scriptures are amazing. So if you're a Christian of any kind, you should know that you're instructed. And in the book of Proverbs, it actually says that you should call wisdom your sister. And some translations say your girlfriend, that understanding should be your intimate friend. So it's personified. Wisdom is personified in the book of Proverbs. And if you think of it that way, of spending time alone with a deep, good friend, she'll always serve you. And so I urge you, that's what really philosophy means. Did you know that? That the word philosophy means the love of wisdom. Now, the reason we often have our eyes glaze over is a lot of people make wisdom complicated. And it shouldn't be that way. In fact, it's very straightforward. There are self-evident truths. And if you've read my book, The Laws of Nature and of Nature's God, I'm not the only person that says that there are self-evident truths that if you look at what's revealed in nature, it's going to start bringing you to some very clear conclusions, but you have to look at them with clarity. Now, today we're going to talk about one philosopher who has influenced all of Western civilization. That's not my conclusion alone. In fact, it's also the conclusion of Peter Singer. Peter Singer is probably the most read philosopher of our times. In 1975, he wrote a book called Animal Liberation. At that time, he taught philosophy at a university in Melbourne, Australia. But now he teaches at Princeton. All of his books are published by very, very mainstream, very high-end book publishers. He's very chic and Tony when it comes to philosophy. And thankfully, there's one area in which Peter Singer and I agree. He is an animal rights advocate. As I said, he believes that a pig is more valuable than a human baby, even a human baby that's been born. So this is kind of serious thinking that's very, very dangerous that Peter Singer has made very common. And if you haven't met animal rights activists, then you need to look at what they're thinking and what they're trying to put into law. This is serious stuff. If you ever heard some of the conclusions that people come to who think in a Hegelian manner, the idea that we have to change our culture dramatically in order to progress. See, all of progressivism comes from Hegelian thinking. And you're going to see why, because Peter Singer is going to help me explain. Again, Peter Singer, I want to underscore, I don't agree with him. Singer not only was involved as an animal rights activist, but he specifically gets into reproductive rights and human lives and their value. And specifically, he wrote a book, here's a couple of books, The Reproduction Revolution, New Ways of Making Babies. That's an important book that he wrote. He also wrote a book, Should the Baby Live? The Problem of Handicapped Babies. Of course, you and I know that his decisions aren't the kind that you and I would come to. He wants them killed. Now, the thing about Singer I want to reinforce, I don't agree with Singer, obviously. But where we agree is the fact that a certain frame of mind has infected all of Western culture. And interestingly enough, he ennobles that, and that is the thinking of Hegel. As we examine this, I'm going to call on Singer to help make my point, because he agrees that Hegelian thinking, even people who never heard the name Hegel, think in a Hegelian manner. And he is joined in this program, you're going to hear bits and pieces of, just little clips, by a British philosopher, Brian Magee. And they're on a BBC production. You're going to hear Brian Magee because of his very clear British received pronunciation. You'll see the distinction, right, in Peter Singer, because Peter is actually from Australia and speaks a little bit differently. So these two gentlemen will help comment on the points I want you to understand about how widespread this pernicious thinking of Hegel and how widely accepted and believed it is, because ultimately it's a form of religion. It's a religious belief about the nature of history and the nature of mankind. Georg Wilhelm Fredreich Hegel. Yeah, it's a mouthful. Just call him Hegel. That's what most people do. Let me cut to the chase. Hegel offered through his philosophy, and essentially his philosophy of history, that was one of his books. He wrote a lot, he lectured a lot. But through his philosophy of history, he offered people a reason for living. Now, that's kind of scary, but he actually did. And many people took his ideas and bent them slightly in their direction. Marx did that. Hitler did that. Many others have done it. They've taken Hegel and taken his idea of history and bent it to their purposes. Because when you read Hegel, if you believe him, he actually redefines the purpose for the human being and the state in which we live and the times in which we live. He explains that history is in a battle. It's going somewhere, though. A lot of historians just have a confused description of things that happen. No, what Hegel did is change that entirely. And he says that these things that happen are happening for a purpose, and that history is going somewhere. It's progressing. And in writing his theories, he says that's the reason we live, is to contribute to history, is to make a difference in that struggle, what he calls a dialectic, which means back and forth struggle of ideas. And we won't get a lot into that. There's not enough time. But the most important thing to understand is he gave his readers and followers a sense that history's going somewhere. And that's an important premise. He also gave it a sense of spirituality. He gave also not just human beings a sense of spiritual purpose, but the state. That government has a spiritual purpose to help human beings come to fruition, if you will, to true freedom. Now, this is a very common idea that's much more common than you may think. And it's the whole idea behind progress. As I said, many people take this model of thinking and apply the goal to be slightly different at the end. In the case of Marx, it's economic freedom for everybody. In the case of Hitler, it was freedom not only for the Aryan people. Remember, they had been oppressed in World War I, and they lost World War I, and they were punished by the bankers. And Hitler had to punish those bankers and the world bankers, and that was code for a particular race, and Hitler bent it towards race. Hitler was inspired by other racial thinkers of that time to take Hegelian thinking and bend it towards racial superiority, that a particular race would help mankind come to fruition. But that was Hegelian thinking. So it's principally a religious view of history. It's just that there's no God. History itself is its own God. And that's kind of scary, but you're going to see so much more.
I think it's worth pointing out that, in fact, we're all very familiar with something similar to this in the case of religious beliefs, even if we ourselves are not religious people. I mean, many religious believers, including many Christians, believe that all of reality is ultimately spiritual, and that all of reality ultimately has a spiritual or significance or meaning. And I suppose Hegel is saying something very closely related to that, is he? Though not necessarily religious in the conventional sense.
Yes, but the difference might be that the Orthodox Christian view, I think, holds that God is spiritual but separate from the world, and the world is mundane and material. Although it has a spiritual significance, certainly, but it's separate from it. But for Hegel, there's a closer union between the two. You could present the opposite of the Christian view by saying that Hegel is a pantheist, that he believes that God is in the world and in everything.
So we see that Hegel is, in fact, even though he says he is an historian in dealing with facts, he actually has a very religious element. That's his premise. He's explaining mankind, men and women, why we exist, and the role of government, and that it's going somewhere. That's what progressives believe, that we're going to a particular destination. Now, I want you to understand why that is and why this passion you see even in Christians who should believe that there is a definitive truth. That's the nature of Christianity, that there are definitive truths that are revealed in nature and that are self-evident, but that is not what Hegel asserts. And so people who should believe in definition, if you will, of right and wrong, once they accept a Hegelian worldview, Hegel believes that everything is in transition, and that includes the nature of human beings. Their spirits are changing with the times, what's known as the zeitgeist. So you have to change with the times. You have to be relevant. You have to progress. This is a very important premise for Hegelian thinking, and it's infected our entire society.
You're listening to Life Matters.
Hi, I'm Kevin Sorbo, and I was very excited when I heard about LifeFest Film Festival. LifeFest is the film festival dedicated to showcasing films that affirm the intrinsic worth of innocent human life and the profound significance of each life. One seemingly insignificant person can in fact change the whole world in which he or she lives. That one singular life ends up being of vital importance. I'm so glad to hear that you are cherishing that in this film festival and are committed to artfully and creatively protect the lives of those who can't possibly promote themselves.
Life Film Fest is dedicated to bring the message of life to Hollywood and to our culture. Join us on May 5th and 6th. Go to lifefilmfest.com and get your tickets now. That's lifefilmfest.com.
Find out about the exciting cultural change impacting Hollywood. Go to lifefilmfest.com. And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Well, welcome back. We're in a battle of ideas. Objective facts, self-evident truths, common sense are actually being dismissed for new truths. People who should believe in definition, if you will, of right and wrong, once they accept a Hegelian worldview, Hegel believes that everything is in transition, and that includes the nature of human beings. Their spirits are changing with the times, what's known as the zeitgeist.
It seems to me, looking at the exposition of Hegel's ideas that you've put forward up to this point, that there's one central concept out of which almost all the important other ideas naturally arise. The central concept is that understanding reality isn't understanding a given state of affairs, it's understanding a process of perpetual change.
So perhaps now you're seeing these ideas. Again, many of the people who will say these things don't even know who Hegel is. But Hegel has infiltrated our thinking as Western thinkers. And you're going to hear that in a bit from Peter Singer himself. But this idea of perpetual change and the frame of mind, or the Geist, that's the German word for spirit, is at the heart of Hegelian thinking. And that's why you'll have friends that you've met, very educated people. Some of them will say they're not religious in any way. Nevertheless, how you think and the ideas that you put forward, they will condemn if those are not progressive ideas. They're concerned that your ideas are old-fashioned and stuck in the idea that there's absolute truth, that there's such a thing as objective right and wrong. And that's actually a principle of, yes, Western civilization, really. You see, Hegelian thinking, even though it came out of Western thought, is dedicated to destroying Western thinking. Western thinking is built on the fact that there is a creator. Somehow we're here, and you can see in creation certain truths. And one of those truths is that human beings are a little bit extraordinary. They're not mere animals. As we pointed out, that's not the conclusion that Peter Singer came to. Peter Singer has come to the conclusion you can kill human beings, just as the communists came to that conclusion. And the Nazis, they came to the conclusion certain human beings can be disposed of for their purposes. Their purposes are the ultimate purposes of change. Change itself, according to the struggle of history, is the goal. You must have change if you're going to progress. So I've met people, and it stunned me that I never thought they had these ideas in their head, and yet they tend to either agree with these ideas of constant change, because that's good and it's progressing somewhere, or when they're confronted with these wacky ideas, they go silent because they've been influenced by Hegelian relativistic thinking, and they don't have an answer. They should be the ones to explain, no, there's actual definitive right and wrong. You can recognize right and wrong. And it isn't because I'm a religious person. It's because these are objective facts. And we've spent time talking about objective facts and why our founders built our nation on self-evident truths, objective facts that are revealed in nature. So Hegel is at war with self-evident truths. And yet we live in a society that people, again, just like breathing in air, for millions of years, people have breathed air. They never called it oxygen. They never understood what it was, but it's kept them going, kept them alive. And so, in some ways, Hegelian thinking is very much a common element of our current society, and it has a detrimental aspect. It's not oxygen. In fact, it has the opposite effect. It could be rather noxious. It's a noxious part of the air we breathe culturally. If you understand that's why your friends think this way, it's going to help you explain, no, wait a second, things don't constantly change, and that somehow that makes moral change. Now, I want to make a distinction. Technologically, things can change. That's very different than morally. And Hegel is talking about morals and ideas and spiritual things. The Geist, the spirit of mankind, must change, is what he has asserted.
You see, the influence that Hegel had is not just an influence in philosophy. It's an influence in theology, in history, in politics, in economics even, in law. Now, the fact that Hegel's ideas could be applied in those ways shows how fruitful his approach, and particularly the historical elements of his approach were, because it was that historical idea of things as having developed, as being a process, that could be applied by scholars in all these different areas.
So I thank Peter Singer for making the point that I've been trying to make with a lot of people, that even though they may not know the name Hegel, their idea of progress, and again, if someone tells you this is progress, I suggest you ask them, yeah, but what's the goal? Because if you don't know what the destination is, you can't be sure it's progress. They will have often a very vague destination, saving Mother Earth. So we have to do the following things in the law. We have to change the law that governs everyone because our goal is to save Mother Earth. So once they come up with what their goal is, then you need to talk about that goal. They often will avoid that because anything that you assert as true because of moral certainty or ethical certainty revealed in nature, they actually will end up dismissing because they don't see the immediate present as applying. Their goal is change. Keep changing because morality is changing. So it's a very slippery worldview, and it's very, very common. It is the basis for progress, but it's not what you think. And as we just heard from Peter Singer himself, this way of thinking and seeing the world and the nature of mankind, the nature of the state in particular, because Hegel combines human beings' purposes and history itself with the form of government by which human beings give themselves to history. And so this struggle, and literally it's a struggle, you hear about it in Mein Kampf. Literally Hitler talked about, that's my struggle, my war. He was speaking in Hegelian terms, to change things. You always hear about the revolution. The revolution in Marxist ideology. Are you down for the revolution? Are you willing to change? That is part of the struggle that's in progressive thinking. You have to progress towards this goal. If you do not examine this way of thinking, if you're willing to set aside truth and call it malleable or relative, and again, I hate to tell you this, there's many people, some of whom I've admired, and some of whom call themselves Christians, but they don't understand Christian principles and have substituted the religion of Hegel, our cultural religion, of progressivism and relativism, and it's really a form of humanism. We've talked before about what is humanism. The Supreme Court has called secular humanism a religion, and it really is, and Hegel makes that clear. that it's got a spiritual aspect to it, even though it denies the existence of God. So Hegelian thinking is very dangerous. There's many people, they don't call themselves Marxists even. They're merely progressing somewhere. Why would you stand in the way of progress? So this is a very difficult idea to take apart, but you have to. If you want to be wise, if you want to understand wisdom, this is a philosophy, which is a claim on wisdom. Philosophy says it loves wisdom. So this is a claim on wisdom and on truth that's false. And it's so common in our culture, and Peter Singer just made that point. In fact, we'll listen to it again. Peter Singer admits this. It isn't me talking. It's Peter Singer, the Hegelian, that's talking.
You see, the influence that Hegel had is not just an influence in philosophy. It's an influence in theology, in history, in politics, in economics even, in law. Now, the fact that Hegel's ideas could be applied in those ways shows how fruitful his approach, and particularly the historical elements of his approach were, because it was that historical idea of things as having developed, as being a process, that could be applied by scholars in all these different areas.
So I hope you're really getting it. I hope you understand that this is an idea that's everywhere around you right now. I'm going to let Professor Magee, again, a great British philosopher, he's going to explain this one more time.
And I think it's very striking, after the whole of our discussion up to this point, to list the fundamental ideas of Hegelianism that we've talked about, which Marx simply took over and incorporated into Marxism. Among these are, first, the idea that reality is a historical process. Second, that this process changes by a dialectical movement, dialectical change, historical dialectic. Third, that it's all going towards a goal. Fourth, that that goal is a conflict-free society. And fifth, that until we get there to the conflict-free society, we're condemned to remain in one form or another of alienation. Now, all these absolutely central ideas of Marxism were taken over lock, stock, and barrel from Hegel.
My friends, we are in the midst of a battle of ideas. The battle for our laws is a battle for our culture, and you can't ignore it. You have to be sure that common sense, self-evident truths, objective facts are the standards by which we make our laws. Don't be silent at this time. Remember that lives are at stake in this battle, and lives matter.
Life Matters is a production of the California Pro-Life Council, the state affiliate of National Right to Life.